Alright guys, so in this video I'm going to be speculating on college football possible relegation. What is it? Can it happen? Can they actually kick teams out of the Big Ten and the SEC? We are going to discuss that, but first it says unless the ACC reversed course and decides to take Stanford and Cal, then the Big 12 is tabling further expansion movement until after the football season. So next year becomes the next realignment window. They are being told to wait out what happens in the ACC, and along with the Pac-4, depending on what they do, maybe a merger with the American and the Mountain West. There could be better money available after those things shake out. So I guess we'll have to see what ends up happening in terms of FSU. Kind of the story is on Tuesday, that's the deadline for FSU and Clemson to leave the league if they want to join the SEC by 2024. Doesn't look like it's going to happen. Looks like we're going to be headed into next season or next summer with the storyline of the ACC trying to stick together. Inevitably, I would say the ACC is going to lose Clemson and FSU next summer, but they're at a situation where they have a very nice TV deal through 2036, and a lot of those schools are not going to want to leave, so I do think their conference will remain, but they will lose some of their big dogs. They'll probably turn to SMU. Can they swing Stanford and Cal, to try and replace FSU and Clemson? It would be a good job by them if they're able to do that, but inevitably, this is kind of like a Big 12 situation. The Big 12 lost their two big dogs. Yeah, sure, they were able to kind of rebound, and now they're adding teams, but when you look at that conference, there is no crazy elite program. That's why their TV deal, when people talk about the Big 12 adding all these teams, their TV deal is only $31 million per year for all those teams. It's not that great. The ACC's, I believe, is actually $41 million, so it's $10 million more, and that has to do with the ACC having programs like Clemson and FSU. They're going to bring you more money when you're negotiating, but that's just the current situation. Obviously, the Pac-4, that's kind of like the elephant in the room. What happens to the Pac-4 next year? These teams cannot play themselves. So do they just have non-conference games, in 2024? Their conference is going to consist of 4 teams. Technically, they'll still be a Power 5, because I was reading somewhere that you get 2 years before you lose your Power 5 status, even if you're under 8 teams. We will have to see what happens when it comes to that. And then I saw this. So this is just a metric. This was something that came out last year, and it just gives you a good idea, who should the Big Ten add next? Obviously, we know Oregon on that list at number 4. They've added them, and they've also added Washington. Interestingly enough here, Oklahoma State sitting behind Notre Dame. I mean, Notre Dame is first by far with a score of 77. Everyone knows Notre Dame is wanted by the Big Ten. They're wanted by the SEC. We get that. But Oklahoma State out of the Big 12, number 2. And then North Carolina, yes, they are going to be a big team that I do think could also join FSU and Clemson for pushing a potential way out of the ACC. You also have Stanford. And this is kind of where it gets interesting, because you have the Northwestern situation, and I don't want to read too much into it, like the idea of the Big Ten kicking out Northwestern. Why would they do that? All the history, but they do have a bit of a problem with Northwestern. Do I think Pat Fitzgerald should have been fired? I'm not going to comment on that. I really haven't been following it. I do think a lot of people tend to overreact to stuff, but that did happen. And Northwestern, the past few years, they've been completely uncompetitive. They have the worst stadium in the Big Ten by far. And they planned the new Ryan Field, but apparently there might be funding problems and it's delayed. Would they look to possibly kick out a team like Northwestern and just straight up replace Northwestern in terms of academics with Stanford? I mean, now, could that work? Would relegation work? You can see Nebraska Cornhuskers conferences. You can see Nebraska Cornhuskers conferences mulling kicking out unproductive teams. Nebraska in danger of getting the boot. The short answer is almost certainly no. The long answer is there are schools that would deserve relegation possibly Northwestern, long before Nebraska. Yeah, Nebraska is certainly safe in the conference. They've got too good of a fan base. out there in Lincoln, and they've got a very nice stadium. Nebraska is fine. When you're talking about something like relegation, I don't think relegation in this current climate really works based on the TV deals, number one. Number two, when you look at all the different relegations, like take a look at this for example. I believe this was back in 2015, so don't pay attention to the teams really on here, although I guess it would work because Northwestern and Rutgers, I would say, the two worst teams in the Big Ten, they would be going down to the MAC, but then the Big Ten would be taking on Ohio and Toledo. I'm not really sure that's how relegation would work. Based on how we are, especially with the Big Ten having teams everywhere, it would just make so much more sense if there was relegation and the team with the worst record, got relegated down to a lesser league. The Big Ten would take like the best team from the American or something. That just seems like it would make more sense. I think ideally it wouldn't even be relegation. You would just straight up kick Northwestern out of the Big Ten by getting all the universities together saying, oh, there was hazing, we have to do it, whatever. And then kicking them out and using that as an excuse. Listen, Northwestern, they're really good in terms of academics. It is interesting. They did make the Big Ten championship twice in the last 5 years. Now, obviously, that's completely because the Big Ten West is terrible. If they were in the Big Ten East, they would be losing 9 games virtually every year. But, Northwestern, not good in terms of football. They're more academics based. But think about it. The Big Ten just exchanges Northwestern for Stanford. And I think that'd be a pretty good situation. But let's also be clear that there have already been contracts that have been signed, and you cannot just go around kicking teams out of conferences. You would have to, make up something like, oh, the hazing, we have to do it, whatever. And then you would bring in Stanford. And then there's also the idea, a lot of people talk about this, you've got a team like Vanderbilt who is just completely non-competitive in terms of football. And I think Vanderbilt is a situation where the SEC actually likes them considering they're an academic powerhouse. They're really good at baseball. They're a private university. So they probably want to keep them in the league. It does get kind of ridiculous. It's just completely uncompetitive year after year after year. And we know how good the SEC is. Would it really make sense for Vanderbilt to be participating in the SEC at this point when, sure, they could be in the SEC in all other sports? It's almost like college football does need to, this is what Chip Kelly said, does need to have a separation because it's so much different from all other sports, and that would enable teams to be relegated a lot more easier than having to worry about, let's say, a team like Rutgers gets relegated from the Big Ten. I don't think that's going to happen. They got Rutgers because of the TV market. Does it really have that much of an effect? I don't think so. I know New York, New York City is number one in terms of TV markets because of the population. But is the reason the Big Ten is doing so well in ratings because Rutgers draws in viewers from New York City? Do we really think that's the reason? So it's just I don't know. I know people talk about Rutgers. They really did. They won the lottery. I mean, think about the Big Ten and the rise of the Big Ten just in the past 2 or 3 years. We were talking about the Big Ten possibly adding teams like Kansas, and it's nothing against Kansas. I know they've got a great basketball program, but we've gone from that. They don't get Kansas. They don't get any team in the Big 12. Instead, they go big game hunting, and they've gotten just the entire West Wing. They've completely hit it out of the park. And when it comes to this relegation, I just don't really see how this works. Like the Big Ten, if you're going to relegate, a team like Northwestern, it doesn't make sense to get Ohio University in return. It seems like they would be producing the same results. The only way that would work is if you took the best group of 5 team and put them in the Big Ten. I'm not a big fan of changing. The only way I would do relegation, it would have to be if you finish last place back-to-back years. I would think about it, or it'd be something like that. If you finish bottom 2 back-to-back years, it wouldn't be just based off of 1 year. That might be a soft stance, but it's just kind of my opinion when it comes to that. I think just in the world we live in right now with college football, it's not even a relegation thing. You just straight up kick a team like Rutgers or Northwestern out of the conference and replace them with Stanford. That's probably what they want to do. And the whole college football thing is so weird trying to explain to people, yes, Rutgers is going to be making $70 million in 5 or 6 years, and Stanford, and teams like FSU and Clemson, I think they're going to get out of their deal, but right now they stand to make about $40 million. So you're making almost half of what Rutgers is making. And by the way, that Big Ten contract, it escalates up. They might be in the $80 million range by 2030 because it's so lucrative, but that's just the whole idea behind relegation. Can it work? I mean, technically, you could consider trying it, but it would have to be a completely separate entity. You would have to separate college football from all the other sports, which honestly probably already should have happened. The only reason all of this stuff is getting rotated around is because of college football, and it's affecting other sports, and it's really a catch-22. The only reason any of these other sports exist and can be funded is because of the TV contracts and all the money that college football brings in. A lot of these programs, their only net positive when it comes to athletics is college football. It brings in all the money. Some programs, also college basketball does, but college basketball compared to college football, it's not even close in terms of revenue gained. So that's just the whole idea when it comes to that. I really don't think it's going to happen, but it is something that's interesting. You look at some of these universities. I mean, Northwestern's in a really strange spot. I'll say that. I think, Rutgers is getting slightly better. Shiano, I mean, I'll be honest. Rutgers is getting better. I remember Rutgers, back when they first joined the Big Ten, and it would be like, this is like an FCS team. I'm not even kidding you. When you would see games like Ohio State versus Rutgers, I think Ohio State beat them in back-to-back years 58-0 and 56-0. So they're definitely more competitive now. Vanderbilt, it's not good with Vanderbilt, but I think Vanderbilt had a little bit of a better year last year as well. Either way, I think it's a long shot, but guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.